The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian for Breaking Down Security with third part of our three-part series with Illumio on micro-segmentation. This week we have Nathanael Iversen, who is the product evangelist at Illumio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So, I asked this question of everybody, whether or not, we're doing a sponsored show or not. What's your superhero origin story? How'd you get to where, you get to be, and what does a product evangelist actually do?
Well, maybe we can tie those two things together, because maybe being the chief evangelist is something that they do when they don't know what else to call you.
Right on. Excellent.
For me, my backstory here at Illumio is fairly simple. I was the first person hired that was not an engineer. So my story goes back almost to the beginning. And at the time I was hired to be the first systems engineer in the company. And so my job was actually to take the product out to our beta customers before we were even trying to sell it, and to help them get it going, to take their feedback back and act as a liaison between, early potential customers and the headquarters. And over time, that led into a variety of management and technical roles, from running our systems engineering, standing up customer success, to helping to train our field organizations. And now finally, I'm in this job where I basically, although the job says evangelist, and you might think, oh, well, you're just Illumio's biggest Kool-Aid pourer. But the reality is that I'm more to be a voice that is just about micro-segmentation in the industry. I've had the unique experience of working on literally the largest deployments of micro-segmentation in the world. And so we have a product marketing team that's, real big about kind of the chest pounding and, saying go Illumio. And I get to be a voice that's more about the technology and to represent just what the technology is impacting and doing in the world.
Okay, excellent. So thankfully, Illumio's given us some talking points. I know we've talked to Neil and Katie in the last couple of months here, and it's been very enlightening learning about micro-segmentation. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and I was doing some background research, and I was reading about dark reading and some of these items, and one of the biggest drawbacks that I saw about micro-segmentation, other than what to exactly segment, is where all your assets are and where your data is. And, that seems to be the biggest problem that a lot of organizations have with micro-segmentation. Where are their assets located, and how do they, encapsulate them into this micro-segmentation? Do you have any quick wins for companies that want to put in micro-segmentation, but maybe they're geographically dispersed, or maybe they have a data center, or maybe they have a cloud and a data center? How do they do that easily? Is it just what does the inventory look like for that, and what do you tell them when they have a disparate network like this?
Well, in many ways, that situation is the situation where micro-segmentation is really the only thing that will work. The challenge that you have is that if your stuff is spread all over, and presumably there's a bunch of networks and routers and firewalls and other things in between, all of those network devices, they work along the paths that the network provides. In other words, if you've got subnet or VLAN boundaries, then you can put a gate or a control there. If you've got a firewall making a zone, you can put a control there. But if you've got things that are spread all over the place and they don't fall neatly into those zones, you actually need a way to do the segmentation that's not relying on the underlying infrastructure. In other words, it needs to be able to do that separation without making changes to the subnets, the VLANs, the zones, the firewalls, the security groups, the whatever. And it's in that situation that when people are faced with that I think we do get phone calls, and our industry broadly gets phone calls of saying, hey, like, we can't really throw away our data center and build a new one just to move things around. Like, how do we actually control things inside there. And that is very much something that I think that microsegmentation addresses when done right.
Excellent. Okay. So I thought this was on a news article, but it was in the notes here that we've got. So you said, well, somebody had added that according to a recent survey of 300 IT professionals, 45% currently have a segmentation project or are planning one. When you say IT professionals, are you talking about organizations and how many of these 45% actually get to fruition and where they're using it on a regular basis? And does Illumio help with, consulting on making that happen?
Yeah, well, I think what I'll do is maybe talk a little bit about some of the reasons that we've seen that happen. Now, those particular people, I think, were all people that, responded to a poll and had titles that would broadly fall into the infrastructure or the security side of the house. So probably a fairly typical group of people for your audience. And in terms of like even outside of that, if half of this random sample of people are doing that, who are the people and are there common characteristics maybe that make up this, 54, 53, whatever the percentage is? And I think we see two kind of broad reasons that people are picking up microsegmentation today. There's a small group of people that's very compliance oriented. They're literally shops that have something like PCI. They have SWIFT if they're a bank. They may have HIPAA or healthcare things. They may have critical national infrastructure requirements if they're a power plant or some kind of energy generation or something like that. And so for those people, doing more segmentation isn't something that they woke up and said, hey, let's get us some. It's something that some external regulator or agency said, no, you need you some. And so there is some portion of the segmentation industry that is driven by regulation and compliance. The part of it that is actually much larger at this point, and this is actually something that we've seen change in the last, say 18 months, early or in the cycle of the company and the cycle of the industry, it was predominantly that. It was predominantly compliance. And that's why you have all the early adopters being banks and people that have huge information assets that they're trying to protect. But more recently, I know that of an organization that they are a pipe foundry. They literally make metal pipes.
Okay.
And they're pursuing microsegmentation. And you say, I doubt that's because of regulatory and compliance reasons. Yeah, probably not, right? It's probably not. So why would they? Well, I think, and this is the thing that I think I've seen growing, is that increasingly, as there have been more and more breaches, as there's been more and more ransomware and, these kind of things that happen, they're not just happening to Home Depot. They're happening to, East Tuscaloosa School District. And something gets in and it's happening somewhere. And what happens is somebody on the board of a mainstream company, in other words, somebody that's not an IT business first, maybe they make something, they manufacture something, or a law firm or something else. And the board, they're aware that their municipality was just held for ransom, that the school district just got hacked, that the regional medical center just had to pay $5 million to unlock some things. And it was all quiet, but the leaders in a community know. And so we've had increasingly things where the security team has been surprised that they actually have the full support of the board. But the board has actually said, we don't know what the answer is, but we don't want to end up like this. And they hold up the newspaper. What do you want to do? And I think for many organizations, segmentation has been on their to-do list for a long time. If you get an audit report back, is more segmentation on the audit report? Well, of course it is. Every time there's more segmentation on the audit report. Does anything happen? Well, historically, not so much. Why? Because it's hard. And yet, this is giving, I think, a lot of security directors and executives the ability to, when their boss says, what do we do to not end up like that? They're like, I'm going to pull out that segmentation project because it's actually proactive. It actually net cuts my exposure. So I think that just sense of increased risk and realizing that they need to do something proactively, not a technology that's reactive, but they need to actually cut the attack surface. And this goes to micro-segmentation, it goes to identity and access management, it goes to patching. There's a number of proactive things that an organization could do, but I think that tailwind is pushing kind of across the industry.
Okay. So we'll go back to those numbers. 45% are actually trying to implement a segmentation project. There's 55% who are not. So there was over 300. So we're assuming about 160 people are not doing some kind of segmentation project. What are some of the misconceptions that may get those 55% of people moving more towards wanting to do microsegmentation? What are some of the misconceptions that they might have about implementing this?
Probably the biggest one is that it's too hard. Because I don't think you would talk to a security professional who would say that less segmentation is better. Like if you just ask any security professional, how much separation should I have? And the answer is always just a little bit more. It's like a ratchet wrench. If you've got the ratchet wrench, you want it to tick in only one direction. And your job is every year to try to pull that handle and make that ratchet go just a little bit tighter. And yet at the same time, that doesn't generally happen. And why is that? Well, because the cost of that segmentation decision is typically borne by whoever is operating the firewalls or the network. Because if you're going to do your segmentation with subnets, VLAN zones, well, whoever programs the firewalls, whoever programs the switches, they're going to be on the pointy end of the stick called give me more segmentation. And so it ends up being the case that you can want more segmentation, but if somebody has to manually type hundreds or thousands of ACLs, everybody goes, that's a project that's too big. We're not going to do that this year. We'll leave it on the list for another year. And so I think that's probably the big misconception, just from the standpoint that you don't actually do that when you're micro-segmenting. And there's actually a clean break in the architectural model. Instead of humans manually typing IP addresses that have to be in perfect order in a list in a router or a firewall, you're dealing with establishing policies, and computer automation helps you actually get the rules built. And so it's different. And it being different, that means that it's like, well, is that scary? Like change good? Well, yes, if I can control it and feel like I can master it. Change bad if it makes me feel uncomfortable or like I'm not going to succeed. And so, interestingly, if you had taken those numbers probably even just a year ago, they might have been half that. And so I think that as companies get success and hear about success for people other than, say, the large banks, where everybody might know that they have extraordinary amounts of resources, and if they put their mind to it, well, of course they can succeed. But I know that if you look at our website, you'll see companies on there that are very small, all the way up, of course, to the megafauna. And I think that that's probably the thing. It's just that it's hard, that I won't be able to get it done.
Awesome. Okay. So how well does this scale? Let's say I'm in AWS and I have one availability zone, and all of a sudden I need to move to a hot site or something where it's completely separate. And this kind of goes back to the previous section. And the last time when we talked to Katie, she had mentioned that there was an agent-based system that goes on some of the endpoint devices.
Sure.
How quickly can people move with this? Because I mean, we're talking about Docker and microservices that get spun up into milliseconds and stuff. We've got to go over here to AWS East now and have the same thing in AWS as same as West. How quickly can you scale this and make sure that it's still secure?
Well, I think I can give you a couple of different parameters there that might help to kind of bound the idea of what's state of the art for scale. And I'm going to give you a few figures and some scope where everything that I'm talking about is stuff that's fully deployed in production. This is not people that have bought from us and are yet to deploy. This is all things that are running code that are stable and have been so for well over a year. At this point, I think in terms of absolute scale, to be at state of the art, you would need to be talking 6 figures of computers at a single company. We've been able to deliver that in more than one place. We have many, many deployments that are in the tens of thousands, for example. So in terms of strict numbers, it goes pretty big. That has pretty significant implications for the policy table size, of being able to handle very large enterprise class policy. And I think probably the dimension that gets most closely to what you asked about the cloud is what's the scale like under automation? And I think one of the best things I could do there is to say that we have experience in automated data centers running in the 40 to 70,000 range, and almost twice that where the entire data center is automated. There are humans. The humans do not directly touch the machines. The humans touch the automation code that actually touches the machines. And in one of these environments, the environment is literally torn down every 2 weeks under automation and replaced. And over a 15-minute period, the entire production environment goes away and then comes back online in waves, all without missing a beat as far as the customers are concerned. And during that time, every single rule churns. As you can imagine, if I take out 100 servers, well, I have to go churn all the rules for not only those 100 servers, but the things those 100 servers talk to. And so then as they're being respun, those rules have to be recreated and then reapplied. And so during that 15-minute time, it's a constant just crunch of every security rule, everything that permits anything, and it all works flawlessly and works seamlessly. And so, to get to those kind of places, do you have to work carefully with the DevOps team? Well, of course you do. You've got to go through and make sure that in their build script, as they need access to certain network services, that the security layer is stood up and able to provide that access. And so, as a company, we've got quite a bit of experience in kind of working through that. But, if somebody's worried that if they add another 100 nodes to their holiday shopping cart, that would not be a concern for us. We would happily just go ahead and make that happen for them.
Okay. So I'm imagining like an N-1 kind of issue where it's like, cause some of the notes we've got here is like, enforcement points are now moving from the network to individual servers and hosts. So you must have an N-1 kind of issue. So if you've added 100 new hosts, like you said, to your checkout bin, now you have potentially 99 new entries that have to be added to each individual host to make sure that everything gets done correctly. How does that happen without causing any kind of problems?
Smart engineering. As you can imagine, if we literally had to put in 99 new rules for each thing, that is exactly what would happen. And you would have to put all of those rules out there. Now inside, and this is going to get a little geeky for just a half sec, but inside of IP tables and inside of the Windows filtering platform, you can actually put the rules in directly, or you can put in ranged rules that are hashed. And at that point, the firewall only has to look up the hash. And so you can replace members of the set without really causing an explosion in the number of rules. And so there's smart things that you can do inside of your product to make sure that those kind of events are actually completely trivial to handle. Okay.
So Katie last month also mentioned Windows packet filtering, and does this work as well with a purely Linux environment or a Mac environment? Let's say your heavy dev environment and all your devs only work on Macs. What's the difference here in the change? Does it work equally with Mac's firewall or pfSense or IP tables?
Sure. Well, broadly speaking, yes. The reality is that the network stack of all major operating systems has had a stateful firewall in it for 10, 15 years or more. So if you think about the network stack itself of any of the operating systems, is that mature code? It's super mature code, sure, right? I don't know how many trillion packets a day pass through the Linux kernel through the net filter module, but good Lord, is it a lot. And so this code is tested to the same kind of levels that you might expect, like a black box inside of an airplane. Not that it's exactly tested that way, but in terms of the field use that it's put to, if there was a problem with any of the stack, with its performance, with how it handled anything, it would get flushed out almost immediately. And so, that's why if you look online, you can actually find the scalability numbers for the Illumio approach, and they're not on our website. You can just go look at what the scalability is of IP tables. You can go look at the scalability of what the Windows filtering platform is from the number of rules it supports, how much throughput, all of these kind of things. And, it's tremendously impressive. And it's just because what's the use of an operating system without a stable kernel networking stack, right? Mm-hmm. And so these things are there, they're all present. And that's one of the reasons that we chose to use them as a technology, is because they are ubiquitous and they're massively performant. And arguably, could Illumio even hire enough engineers to QA code to that level? No way. And so it's an interesting thing that there's this latent capability sitting in the operating system that's completely inaccessible, because who could deal with 10,000 firewalls or 1,000 firewalls? Like if I went to your organization and said, hey, Sale, we're going to give you 1,000 firewalls for free. You'd be like, well, just put them on eBay and give me the money. I can't deal with 1,000, right?
Right.
But if they're there and you can use them and they're performant and they're not going to be in the way and they have the scalability hooks and all the other things, these are bits of code that were designed by some of the best computer scientists on the planet, right?
Right. Yeah. So I didn't mean to get overly technical there, but when I was mentioning Linux, is there any specific requirements for Linux? Do you have to have a system D based one? Will it work with Alpine if you're using a major Docker kind of a deal? I'm just trying to get my head around how it would work in Linux. I know that systemd has some APIs that would allow you to make changes to firewall. So how does it work in a Linux environment? Is it just a bash script or something, or is there an agent for that as well?
No, there's an agent for that as well. Now, like on the Windows side, it is a user-based agent. It's not inline to traffic. So that remains the same. And, that agent is basically there to just put rules into NetFilter. Now, this works across pretty much all versions of Linux, AIX, Solaris, going back, 10 or 12 years at this point. If you go back far enough, I think, is it 5.2? Is it 4.8 where NetFilter entered the kernel? You go back far enough and there's a place where there was not a stateful firewall in Windows. There was not a stateful firewall in Linux. But as long as you're past that, you're going to end up being supported. And you raise an interesting other point when you mention Docker, because Docker is one of a number of technologies. Kubernetes would be another, where you have other programs that want to manage some of that firewall table space, particularly for automation things like containers and things like that. And so our support for containers includes the kind of coexistence that you need in order to run Docker, in order to run Kubernetes. And we do both of those at scale across several different, network deployment models. So.
Okay. Actually, just thinking here, I'm getting rid of some stuff in my office, and I come across some SDN cards, some software-defined networking cards. If my organization has software-defined networking, for instance, and I know it's fairly niche still, maybe, but have you run into any kind of instances where that doesn't work well with Illumio?
It's actually the contrary. Almost all of our large customers use SDN extensively. Oh, and right. I think it works like this. Imagine that you're the VP of infrastructure. And so your job is to keep packets moving, right? That's how you get your bonus. It's how you get paid. And if in the year 2020, you don't have some ability to automate subnets, VLANs, and zones, that's going to be one of the first projects that your replacement does.
Right.
Honest to goodness, right? The DevOps people can stand up servers in 10 minutes. Should it really take 3 weeks to get a VLAN? So there's some of these things that doing automation of the network layer is a thing that needs to be done, especially in the hyperscale enterprise. Now, what's happened, I think, is that many of the largest scale customers went, well, great, we have SDN. Why don't we use that for microseg? Like SDN can program the firewall rules. And like, so why don't we just do that? And that's where we hope to save the industry more pain. Because I can tell you that there is a class of our customers that they call us after 15 months of beating their head against that wall. And it's not because SDN doesn't work, and it's not because they don't need SDN. It's because SDN was designed to do exactly what a network vendor would design it to do: automate subnets, VLANs, and zones. But it doesn't help you with the problem that you face if you need to discover and write fine-grained policy across hundreds of thousands of ports. If you have to type that all manually, automation doesn't help you. You need actually a different approach that gets you away from the dependence on IP addresses in order to write that policy. And so micro-segmentation actually becomes the complement. Absolutely automate your network using SDN, and then bring in micro-segmentation to automate the small scale segmentation. And they end up not being anything other than supportive and complementary technologies. I don't think there's a single place that Illumio has gone in and somebody stopped their work with SDN. There are definitely places where SDN teams have said, thank God I don't have to do the micro-segmentation anymore. Like we've had that conversation, but I think that, broadly, SDN is good and people have reasons to do it, and that there's micro-segmentation and there are different reasons that you do that.
Okay. All right. So we've got a couple minutes left here. I wanted to go through maybe some best practices because, people who use the cloud or they, use any OS or something and it's not configured properly. S3 buckets are world readable. Data's being leaked all over everywhere. People will want to use your product, but there may be some settings in there that leave them vulnerable or work as intended. And I'm using quotey fingers there, where they're completely open and breached, and something might come back. Well, that works as intended. There's no bug there. It works as intended. If I'm one of the 45% that have just implemented this, what are some of the things that I maybe need to go back and go, I should probably check that and make sure that it's secure or more secure, or, depending on my threat model, what are the things that I need to do to check and do hygiene wise?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe it's a bit like the Saturday morning cartoons, and they had those cereal commercials, right? And they tell you that the cereal is part of a complete breakfast with juice, toast, and spread.
That's right.
And there's a sense in which, to your question, that's kind of like micro-segmentation, identity and access management, and good patching and vulnerability scanning. Like these are things that go together, like peanut butter and chocolate go together. Like they're really good things. I can't tell you the number of times that a company has approached us and said, we just got done on a big IAM initiative, and now we want to do micro-segmentation. We've also been at the company that said, we were deciding whether we were going to do micro-segmentation first or IAM first, and we decided micro-seg. So we're talking to you now, and then we're going to have, all of the IAM vendors come in, at the tail end of this 6 months from now. And so we've seen these things go together tremendously well, because obviously IAM is critical. Like if your passwords are bad, if you can get to the system legitimately, you're still going to have a problem. And likewise, just because you have good password management doesn't mean that there won't be open ports or vectors on the machine. So I think there's a standpoint in which there's an ecosystem of things that are important, and you find this in any of the zero trust frameworks from Forrester or other places that, when you tighten one thing down, then it gives you an excuse to go to the next thing and tighten it down to match, right?
Right. Cool. Okay. So what does micro-segmentation adoption look like as we head into the new year?
Well, I mean, that's a fun, open-ended question. I think that adoption looks, for most of our customers, like more. One of the interesting things that happens with micro-segmentation is that you can start with the settings anywhere you want. In other words, a lot of organizations, if they haven't been going on a segmentation journey, they have a perimeter firewall, and then it's pretty flat and open inside. And the next level down might be that you segment by environment. Like I've got devs separate from prod, separate from staging, UAT, PCI, something like that. And you've got these big kind of course buckets. And lots of people have that. And if you want to bring the segmentation down further, maybe you put a ring or a fence around something as small as an application. Oh, well, that changes things a lot. Like I can tell you in our modeling, that'll eliminate about 90% of the attack surface if you just ring fence all the applications. Now in Illumio, that's one line of policy, but let's just say that that's what your first goal is for segmentation. I'm going to ring fence my applications. Now, instead of having just environmental stuff, I've got my applications ring fenced. Wow, 90% improvement, pat everybody on the back, give the security team a big bonus, send everybody off to Christmas. Well, when they come back, what's left? Well, there's 10% left. Like, what are you going to do about that 10%? And this is where I think companies start making risk-adjusted decisions. Because with a good micro-segmentation solution, you can go all the way down to ports and protocols. You can say, well, no, people should only talk DNS to the DNS server. It's not that, the DNS port is open within the application. Nothing in the application should talk DNS to the DNS port. Like the only thing that should happen is talk DNS to DNS server. So then you start saying, okay, well, we're going to tighten some things down so that they're port and protocol. Maybe your Windows domain services that are critical, you might tie down to the process so that it's only a certain Windows process that can communicate to the NetBIOS name resolution service. And so there's these different layers of granularity. And what I will tell you is, you don't want to boil the ocean to start. You don't want to say that because a solution is capable of doing process, that's where you're going to start. Just crank all the knobs as hard to 11 as you can. That's a good way for IT projects to fail, right? Like a lot of times you want to step into something, get a win, show an improvement, and then be on a journey towards tightening things down in a risk-adjusted way. And so I think as we go into the new year, as we talked about earlier, there's companies that are coming to the realization they need to start being on this journey. And so they'll start with environmental separation. They'll start with application ring fencing. But people that are a little further down the journey are going to be saying, hey, for my crown jewel assets, the things that are most important, I want another ratchet. I want another tick on that ratchet handle and give it a pull.
Cool. Okay, so one last question. What does the future micro-segmentation look like? I mean, we've already talked about going from the macro, which is entire networks or entire, applications and all of their stuff in one segment all the way down to ports and protocols. It seems like you've got everything covered, that there's no new boundaries to be done. Are you moving into things like maybe areas where certain data can be stored versus elsewhere, or certain databases? I'm just trying to spitball here, but what does the future of micro-segmentation look like? Is it going to get more micro? Can it?
Well, I don't know that it's about granularity. There's a lot of different dimensions to technology, and one of them is certainly like big, small, right? Do things bigger, do things smaller, do things faster. But probably one of the biggest optimizations is to do things better. And I'll give you a simple example of that. It's something that's already in our product, and there'll be more things like this coming, I think, from Illumio and from the industry as a whole. But about a year ago, we actually did an integration with threat detection vendors, people like Rapid7 and Tenable and Qualys and things like that. And it was something actually that one of our customers brought to us. They said, maybe you can help us. We are never going to be able to patch all of the vulnerabilities in our systems. I think that's common if you have a lot of systems. You have the vulnerability scans, but you will never patch all of them. And they said, what's interesting is we have this vulnerability data kind of system by system. I know how many faults are on this web server on that database over there. But what I don't know is how much it matters. And I don't know how much it matters because I don't know how many things can get to that database. Like Illumio, you guys have a map and you understand the connectivity, and you also understand how segmentation has limited the connectivity. So could you help me understand where I have vulnerabilities that I could reduce just by putting in more segmentation? Is there a place that I could use my vulnerability data to make a higher quality decision about how tight my segmentation is or isn't? And so that led us to do this work of integration and to develop some things on our map where you can actually get risk scores. and that are a combination metric of the vulnerabilities, which Illumio doesn't generate. Like, we don't do that. That comes from, the vulnerability scanners, and then our network connectivity metrics. And you put those two things together into a hybrid score. And now all of a sudden you're having a nuanced conversation about segmentation. It's not just more is better. You're actually having a conversation around, how do I meaningfully reduce risk that I understand? Like, this is a known risk. How do I use segmentation as a compensating control for the inability to patch? And that's a nuanced conversation. And I think that, once you get past let me take the first couple ticks on the handle and you get those early gains, then you can start to have a really nuanced security conversation that I think closely mirrors the dialogue that security teams have wanted to have for a long time, which is not just, let's do more because we know more is better, but how about let's do more because we can prove that more makes an impact and that it actually affects our overall posture. And I can prove that to my boss. I can prove that to my boss's boss, and they can take it to the board and say, we categorically reduced our network risk exposure by 37% in the last 6 months. That's kind of wild to be able to say.
Yeah, that'd be great. A lot of times we're suffering for metrics, and it sometimes comes down to how many vulnerabilities you have in the scanner, and a lot of times that's not a good indicator. So yeah, having the ability to say, well, we're more secure now, and here's why, and here's how is a great thing. So I think we're at the end of our time, but Nathanael, thank you for joining us. If people are interested in talking to you more about micro-segmentation, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm easy to find as one of the public people in the company. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name. You can certainly find Illumio on the web at illumio.com. And there's a contact us chatbot there. You hit that, we will get people in touch with you. Pretty easy to find. So whether you want me personally or you'd like the company, I think we'll be standing by and ready to help however we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathanael, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.